Okay, well, thank you so much. So now we're going to have Dr. Cromer come on to introduce our next speaker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Cromer. I, like Brittany, and I recently graduated fellow and now junior faculty member at Mass General Hospital. I'm also a native Houstonian, so very happy to see many Texans on this call. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Hafida, who graduated from the University of Tripoli in Libya, then completed her endocrinology fellowship in Detroit and an obesity fellowship at Boston University and Boston Medical Center before joining staff at Joslin Diabetes Center. At the Joslin, she established a metabolic surgery clinic for people with diabetes that specializes in the study and management of patients who undergo weight loss surgery and manages patients with obesity and complex metabolic disorders. She's also passionate about advocating for people with diabetes and obesity, believes in eliminating obesity-related stigma, and providing excellent, quality, equitable care for all. Finally, Dr. Hafida is the Director of Medical Education, where she oversees design, content creation, and execution of a wide variety of education programs tailored to a variety of healthcare professionals. And because of that, she is going to be an excellent speaker on the topic of science and medical communications. This session is meant to be interactional. So if you have any comments, please do place them in the chat or raise your hand to ask any questions. And with that, I'd like to leave it to Dr. Hafida.
Thank you, Dr. Cromer, and welcome everyone. I'm Summer, and there's no structure to today's talk, but I'd like to share with you what I do in my professional institution, and wonder if Dr. Cromer has any questions for me, so we can lead with that.
Yes, of course. So to get us kind of starting and discussing, I thought a first question is, why does medical communication matter? Why is it important?
Thank you for that question. That's excellent. I'd like to have our participants let me know why they think communication, medical education is important, and who they may find medical communication challenging, or why they think that's important. So everybody chat. I'm watching the chat box now, but I'll start with we communicate from the time we wake up in the morning till we go to bed. And what we do is highly complicated. What we do is highly complex. And we've went through all of this training, learning complicated scientific concepts and integrating it all together. And sometimes simplifying these concepts is super important because otherwise all of our efforts, everything we do, whether it's research or just learning, is not unfortunately being conveyed, so it gets lost. So think about, for example, a presentation that you may have to your peers about your most recent research project, and you have an audience that isn't really engaging with you, or that half hour passes and you wonder at the end of the day, did anybody really understand what I just said after all those days and nights that I spent in the lab, or wherever it is. So knowing how to communicate with your audience is super important, so that all of your efforts and everything that you do on a daily basis doesn't get lost. We communicate with patients, we communicate with their families, we communicate with our peers, we communicate with with our families and our community. Communication and understanding how to do it effectively is just as essential as the knowledge we have in our heads. And I see some great comments. Thank you, Andrew. Sometimes I think I have made a great plan with the patient only to have them come back in 3 months and none of it occurs. That happens all the time. So, I'd also like to hear from you in the chat what kind of strategies that you use. But listening to yourself, self-reflection is also very important. So think about this, this COVID pandemic and what has happened. For example, how many messages haven't gotten through to people? How many questions have you gotten from people who you think this should have been very obvious and very clear? Communication has not been the greatest. That's the conclusion, and perhaps that's part of the reason why we are in the situation we're in. So we have to be communicators. Just as good as we are with the science and the knowledge we have to be communicators. And Noah is telling us that miscommunication consequently can be dangerous. Absolutely. It can be dangerous. Not only to our patients and community, but also for ourselves. You know, we might get in trouble if we miscommunicate.
So there's been several excellent comments on the chat about how important communication is and how if it fails or falls through, it can lead to adverse outcomes. Are there any principles that guide your medical communication to ensure clarity, especially when talking to patients or colleagues?
Absolutely. So I'll focus a little bit more on the education piece to peer-to-peer, to colleagues. So most of us, I imagine, we are responsible for teaching. So I'll put patients in a different category, but we're responsible for teaching people from their early careers in medical school all the way to, you know, our senior colleagues as well. So the principles that we use differ according to the audience and who we're talking to, but the principles of education or adult learning are the same. So one of the most important things to learn, and this can be very fluid, is to really understand who your learner is, what their background knowledge is, what you can use from their prior knowledge to anchor on and then build on, and what their prior experiences are. So that's probably the most important thing, to understand your learner. And I see some comments from the audience that say, I specialize in pediatric psychology, big fan of scaffolding and the teach back method. I love that, Samantha. That's really good. And asking my patient questions as I go. And that's not only applicable to your patients, also for peer-to-peer. For example, it's important to know that your learners, each person has their own learning style. We've all heard of these concepts, like I'm a visual learner or not visual learner. But what the studies tell us that despite what your individual learning style is, what's more important is that you style the teaching method according to your content. For example, if you're teaching what a CGM readout, continuous glucose monitor readout, looks like, and instead of putting all of the glucometrics or the things that you want in a bullet point fashion, it's more informative. It's better to have a visual representation of what that is. So the teaching style would be putting the actual graph on, maybe circling the important points rather than putting on a bullet point method. That's, for example, one way to modify the teaching style according to the learners. And please, share with me what kind of teaching styles that you like as well in the comments. It's, other methods that are effective in communications are using space type of learning. So if you have a knowledge or content that you want to convey, chunking out those basic concepts into little bits and pieces, and instead of having one concept at a time, really helps your learner, because they're bringing from prior memories, and then you're allowing them to have a break and have a period of time where they form new memories and new knowledge base before you introduce something else. So spacing is also an effective way to make sure that you communicate a certain concept. And if there's
So I was just going to
question. Yeah.
Ask this question. Going back to one of the first comments you made about understanding where your learner is coming from and what kind of education they have. I was going to ask if you have any preferred methods for assessing where the learner is, whether that's kind of the Socratic method or, kind of getting an idea for what they learned in their classes or what they, example patients that they've seen. Do you have any kind of preferred methods for getting at that?
Absolutely. So in many of the the things that we do here at Discern that I'm responsible, we have various types of learners. So one method that we do is just a background knowledge survey. And with, knowing what the content that we want to deliver or what they ask to deliver, we ask them, a bunch of questions. And that survey method really works and helps us a lot. It is not uncommon for people to overestimate what they believe they learn, and we take that into consideration, of course. But that helps, especially if your learners are not with you at the time that you are delivering that content.
And then regarding your second point about, tailoring your teaching to the content, that's obviously been very difficult in COVID, where many of us are, receiving our education through Zoom or through kind of different formats than normal. Do you have any recommendations for kind of optimally using Zoom for teaching, or finding ways to, have those visuals, have that kind of chalk talk feel during Zoom?
That's a great question, Dr. Cromer. So the learning platform, the remote learning platform, it has been very challenging. And I personally did not realize how challenging it was until recently, where I've come to realize that when you are teaching online, you have to be on the air all the time. There's no break, there's no natural pauses that you can allow. It's like being on air all the time. So, being a physician, that's not what we were trained in. We're not radio hosts or anchors. So that's probably the number one challenge. So giving yourself a break in the form of pausing, asking a clinical question in between gives, what I do is I take the entire chunk of time that is allocated to me, and I divide it into equal spaces. And I allow for that natural pause in the form of a question, or the form of a poll, or the form of an activity, like a short, quick game. And that not only allows me to take a breather, but it also provides that spacing that I was talking about so that the learner can also take a break. But it is challenging. It is very challenging in the remote setting.
And I see a comment from Samantha that I think will be a good discussion. I have read some research about communicating related to people's expectations, related to possible outcomes, for example, positive versus negative, and try to assess potential barriers or concerns in order to teach and provide support related to those concerns in relation to the learner's goals.
That's a long question, Samantha. That's a long one, but I think I understand what you mean. So one thing we don't think about when we're teaching is developing that safe space for a learner, especially when learners don't know each other. And you're asking them questions, and there's a leaderboard, or you expect people to talk out loud. Creating that safe space and emotional comfort is super, super important. So I know Noha and I, we use humor a lot. At least we try to be funny, and just make tone it down a little bit. Using music is really a nice way, like even in the introduction, we do this all the time, just to set the ambience and the tone that everybody is. This is everybody's here to learn. It's okay if we don't know the answers, and it's okay to raise your hand and ask us. So I hope people say, I hope I answered, Samantha, your question. Okay.
Just let us know, Samantha, if something is unanswered. Along those we've touched a little bit on difficulties of communication and education during the pandemic, and kind of the limitations of Zoom and ways to make Zoom more approachable. Do you have any recommendations on how to maximize the educational experience for a learner using traditional slides, which is often what we're stuck with on Zoom?
Yes, absolutely. When you're using slides, less is definitely more. Remember, your learner is looking at you speaking, and they're looking at a page that has informational content. So less is more. When there is a concept that you want to teach, try to visualize it. What does it look like? What's important to put on that slide? Leave out the extra text. You know your content. Leave it out if it's not necessary to be on there, and say it verbally. Allow a pause to answer questions, but maybe you can replace it with a picture of a person or a diagram. Or if there's a sentence, chunk it out, put a box around it, and make it a distinct item. You can put arrows in between if there certain concepts are related. But your listener doesn't want to be reading a book at the time you're teaching them. They want to be listening to you. If there's something that you want to point out, like a CGM that you're teaching, that's okay to have on the slide, but less is more. The background they're looking at is really important. Use white backgrounds. Think of yourself as a student in a classroom. What do they want to see? A whiteboard is sufficient. Maybe you want to use a whiteboard on Zoom too, and give everyone the opportunity to write and to participate that way. Definitely less is more. Black and white is enough, and use your words verbally, not necessarily through text.
Great. And I know that you have a significant background in kind of the design of curricula and education, content design. How do you go about creating something like that for those of us who are, towards the end of fellowship, maybe starting careers in academia?
I'd love to hear from our attendees today how they design their curriculum. So I want everybody to type their principles of how they think of designing a curriculum. And I'll tell you how we do it here. So there are two most important things. Who are your learners? So we talked about that a little bit. Who are they? And what do they want to learn? And how am I going to deliver it? In the old days, before the pandemic, we used to have everybody in person in a nice classroom setting with maybe food and coffee, and we could do it that way. So now everything is remote, and that's okay. But how do they want to learn? Am I going to give a live session, or is this asynchronous learning? So those are probably the two most important points. Who is my learner, and how are they going to learn? In what fashion? Then, after that comes the agenda. How do I want to sequence the events? And then how do I deliver it? How am I going to inform them that the program is happening? And who am I going to invite along with me to give these talks? Who is going to review the content? Is it me, or is it a team of people? And at the very end, giving feedback in real time, not only to your learners, but you want the feedback as well. So, making sure that your learners tell you what you did well and what you could have done better. Thank you, Andrew, for your comment. Establishing a clear objective of what you want your learners to know and do, and then you work backwards. Yes, backward design is probably the most effective way to do it.
I imagine that most of the fellows on the call have done a fair amount of teaching of peers or of medical students and residents, but maybe have not designed curricula for a large group. Do you have any advice in kind of taking those bedside teaching or kind of small room chalk talk teaching and turning it into a more complex curriculum?
Absolutely. So what the medical students or the residents or the fellows want to know is what they can use in their clinic when they become attendings. That's probably what they want to know most. So encourage them to bring the cases that they feel challenged with. Encourage them to do the research on their own cases and have them develop a part of the curriculum alongside with you. And that's the best way to do it. We call it productive struggle, or learning by doing is probably the best way. And at the end product is always something beautiful and unique and useful. I think that's the best way to do it.
I've not heard that phrase, productive struggle before, but I feel like that sums up kind of medical training is productive struggle. I really like that. Okay, great. And then back on the idea of Zoom teaching, and especially in like a longer curriculum, do you have any advice for keeping learners engaged and creating kind of that interactive, productive discussion?
Yes, so when we're delivering a synchronous or a live type of program, make things short. The talks should not be more than probably 45 minutes, and allow for some time at the end for Q&A. And try not to, we all try not to stack lectures back to back, and we give breaks. We use Kahoot a lot, we use polling, we use interactive cases, we make videos. All of this is done by us. We're not trained in video production, but these are things that are easy to learn. So when you have an animated video that's 3 minutes of a clinical case, people will be very engaged because they're watching TV, and they'll give you a break to sit back and, take a breather a little bit. And then, asking questions from your audience as well, calling on them to help them feel, that they're part of also the learning process, and their views and opinions and experiences are just as important. If it's asynchronous, that's a little bit different. That gives you the flexibility to really shorten the educational content into maybe 10-minute chunks at a time. Spacing concepts rather than learning like all about type 1 diabetes in one setting. You learn just about, the clinical presentation first, and then you give a little bit of time, and then you learn something else and something else, and you give the participant tasks to do. You engage them in actually doing things, like maybe it could be a quiz, or they could be matching things or writing in a small excerpt of what they learned. So again, productive struggle.
Yes. Well, on the, being inspired by this and wanting to make sure that we leave some time for questions, does anyone have questions about medical communication, especially in the educational world, potentially communicating with learners or being a learner? Okay, here we go. So Andrew asks, would you be willing to share an example of when you felt particularly effective in your medical communication?
Yes, and Andrew, I would ask you, maybe do you mean toward a patient or toward another learner, or?
Either way, I would be curious to hear. It sounds like this is a bit of a broad topic, but if you have an example of both, I'd be interested.
Sure. I'll share with you something, that happened today that I was very proud of. It was a patient communication. This is a patient who was really afraid of taking the vaccine. She had 2 young children, and she just didn't want to, because her reasoning was this vaccine was brand new. So what I told her was that, yes, the virus is brand new, but the technology of vaccine is not new. So all of the vaccines that you got in your lifetime, including the flu shot that you got that year, this technology is old. What they put in the technology, the virus, it is new. And that made her say, oh, well, that makes sense to me. I know the virus is new. I thought the entire thing was new. And so she went out and she promised me that she was going to get her vaccine. So that was something I was proud of today. In terms of, I guess, peer or fellow or, education, I think just having the participant engage, making them feel, like I said, emotionally safe. It's okay not to know, and to help them, reach whatever personal goal they have and go beyond that. Emotional safety is super important in my opinion. Probably that's the #1 thing that I strive for when I communicate with people. Hope that answers the question, Andrew.
I think the concept of emotional safety is especially interesting. Oh, let's let Rachel's question go. Could you please repeat some of the interactive adjuncts you've used, including Kahoot? Some of my teaching is from prepackaged lectures, and I'd love to incorporate these. Happy to hear suggestions from others too.
All right, absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, so Kahoot is actually a really fun interactive tool. And, it's not that unfortunately not that expensive to use, but you can use what it does is that it gamifies your presentation. So it allows you to build, a few questions on there, and you give a code to your participants. They log on to Kahoot, whether it's through their phone or through their browser, and they'll get sort of like little avatars assigned to them, and you answer questions. One question each question is timed, so they have time to think about it and to answer. And then there's a leaderboard at the end, so everybody can see how they've done. And there's music, and there's it's a fun way, again, to relieve the anxiety of learning. It's a fun way to engage and also draw on that prior memory and what the concepts that you've just taught them. So yeah, thank you, Naha, for the link is in there. We use this quite often. The other resource that I like to use, of course, Zoom has its own polls, and other platforms like webinar platforms have polls that you can enter just basic questions throughout your presentations. But something I like to use a lot is creating animated videos illustrating a case, usually clinical cases. And it may sound elaborate and fancy, but it's very, very easy. It's just a drag and drop concept. You have a group of characters that you can choose from, you can customize, you can put them in a clinic, and you can develop a scenario. And at the end, you render a video, and it's something really unique and very special. The one I use quite a bit, and maybe Noha can help me here, is called Vyond, VYOND. And it just elevates your content rather than putting a slide with a 57-year-old patient in all of their labs. This creates a real, almost human-like experience that's really, really fun. And people really do pay attention because they haven't seen it before. So those are probably my two favorite ways to insert engaging content to my talks.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Kavita. We are reaching the end of this segment and want to leave just a few minutes to transition. So I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And we will transition over to the next talk. Right, so our next speaker is Dr. Evan Los. Dr. Los is thankful to have found a balance of clinical work, teaching, research, and advocacy in his current career, while also being able to prioritize family. He currently works at East Tennessee State University and remembers being told during his training that you can't do everything, but really feels that he's found the right niche here 5 years out from training, and is going to share some of his experience with us today and how he got from fellowship to a really rewarding career. He does remember Focus on Fellows as a key experience in helping him make this transition. And he, again, now is an assistant professor at East Tennessee State University in the Division of Pediatric Endocrinology. So Dr. Los, we're very excited to have you today and looking forward to your talk.
Great, thanks very much for inviting me, and thanks for joining this afternoon. And yeah, I do have very fond memories of participate actually the first 5 years of the program, and as a fellow for 3 years, and then as an early career attending for another 2 years post fellowship. And so glad to be back and share a little bit about how I went from there to here, or for you from here to there. I'm also, I'm going to go ahead and share screen to bring up my talk. Great. And let's see if I can get through without having to do any updates for my computer. I don't have anything to disclose. Just starting off, my legs, or I guess my pedigree would look like it's very deep here with the American Diabetes Association, with a member since before my second birthday. But I think that was a typo on the part of the ADA. So I appreciate that they thought that since I could barely walk that I was involved. But I have been with the ADA since the beginning of fellowship, believe in its mission, believe in it as an organization, and it's really been terrific to stay involved through fellowship and early career, participate in programs like Focus on Fellows, and really look forward to being a part of ADA for years to come. So my objectives in this talk is to share a little bit of a personal story, just my own path from fellowship to early career attending. And I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been in my current position as assistant professor in pediatric endocrinology for 5 years. And now in my 6th year, I am putting together my promotion packet to apply for promotion to associate professor. And so as part of that, you look back on all of the things that you've done over the previous 5 years, and even back into fellowship. And so I've had this opportunity to look retrospectively at where I was and now where I am, and then also projecting where I hope to be. And that's good for, I think, everyone at every stage, is to recognize and acknowledge where we were, the hard work that we've done, where we are today, and what we can continue to do, and how we prioritize that to get where we want to be, whether it's 5 years from now or further down the road. So first, I'll be sharing my own path. Again, this is not to make myself look good, but in just sort of recognizing hard work that goes into fellowship and early career. And you can compare and contrast, but just to share opportunities that I've had. So first, as a physician, I am all of these things: a clinician, a researcher, a teacher, an advocate. And these are all the things that I am sort of as a career. But beyond that, also, I have other identities, other roles as a husband, a father, a community member, a citizen, and that goes on and on. If you're an athlete, you really care, you wear many hats. But I'm focusing in this talk mostly on career, and was always told that you're going to have to choose. You're going to need to be either a clinician or an educator or a researcher or work in advocacy. And maybe I didn't like that. I didn't know if it would be true or not, but I think now, 5 years out from fellowship, I do feel like I've got a great balance of all of these. And so I wanted to be the counterpoint. If any of you are being told that you can't do it all, you can, and you can do it while balancing being a really caring and loving family member. But you have to learn when to say yes and when to say no. And I think as a fellow, we all learn to say yes a lot. But as you're transitioning to being early career, if you want to be 5 years in and feel like you've got a nice balance, you actually really have to learn how to say no and to feel okay about it. So I tried to break this up into color bubbles to present these in ways that would maybe stick, and to kind of track each of these from fellowship into being an early career attending. So in fellowship, started gaining clinical experience with the half-day of diabetes clinic and half-day of endocrine clinic. And participate, plenty of time on rounds and staffing the hospital, doing consults, but also revising the DKA protocol at our university. And that was, kind of research, kind of quality improvement, but also it had a clinical basis to it. I was developing and launching Turner syndrome clinics and transgender clinics, was able to get some mini grant awards, again, to support the clinical work that we were doing in Turner syndrome and type 1 diabetes, and then work on quality improvement projects. And as I carried that forward from fellowship to attending roles, I'm growing a clinical practice. When I started my position, it was, I did my training in Portland, Oregon, but then started practice in East Tennessee. And there's a lot of things that are quite different about those places. But literally on my first day, I had 0 established patients. And so I had to grow a clinic, and that's often your job in the first little bit of your career. And so now I do 7 half days, or 70% of my time is spent in the clinical role seeing patients. I'm interestingly took the DKA protocol that I wrote as a fellow, and it is now the DKA protocol that is used in a 21 hospital system in East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. So that work that I did in fellowship carried forward. We developed diabetes pathways that go with the patient throughout the hospital. We optimized inpatient diabetes care protocols. I also work as a regional newborn screening consultant for the newborn screening program. And you'll recognize that your clinical role extends beyond the 4 walls of your office or of those of your hospital, that you will get calls from any provider who sees you as an expert because they're looking for assistance with their own patients. So lots of pediatric providers are reaching out and asking what to do with their patients. So that's clinical. It's also community service, but you will get asked more and more management questions as an attending. So research in fellowship, I started off with 2 sort of clinical areas of interest that grew into research areas of interest. One was within diabetes, looking at diabetes alert dogs, and was fortunate enough to work with a few other collaborators in residency and then into fellowship. And these projects we were able to get published in Diabetes Care, and then Journal of Diabetes Science and Technology. Was asked to write review articles looking at technology use in transition age youth, and then presenting at ADA on some more basic science research that I was able to do as an attending, looking at the biochemical fingerprint of hypoglycemia in human breath. So that was within, diabetes research. I knew I was never going to be heavy duty into research. And so when I'm 70% clinical, 30% everything else, including, teaching and research, like there are weeks that I do no research. There are weeks that maybe I get 5 hours a week. But I knew I was never going to be, running a lab, but I've got clinical questions that then I can go and do some research in. My other area of interest was in Turner syndrome, and specifically looking at blood pressure in Turner syndrome. Carried that forward with some case reports, was involved with some writing groups for Turner syndrome, and then writing review articles that are relevant to the Turner's community. And then once you're an attending, people ask you to write stuff all the time. So I just started writing. And some of these are easy things to write, little review articles. I think that last one is most recent, which is, I thought it was fascinating. It was just, it started as a clinical case. It was a kid with new onset type 1 diabetes who then developed some neurologic symptoms on day 2 after diagnosis, and ultimately was found to have a brain abscess. And so we wrote it up and got it published a couple months ago. So that's the kind of stuff that doesn't take a ton of time to do. Even when you're 70% clinical, you can usually find a couple of medical students and a fellow, which is the other co-authors. The first 2 are third-year medical students. The third is a fellow who was helping us out with the project, and me. And so we wrote it up and got it published. I think it's the first time I've ever submitted something and it didn't even come back like, accepted with revisions. It was just accepted. And I was like, what? Like, don't you want to fix my grammar or anything? They're like, nope, just accepted. So, honestly, the time investment to then get a nice peer-reviewed publication, sometimes it's surprising that you can put in 5 hours of work and end up with a product that you're really proud of. Other times you can spend 3 years of fellowship on something that maybe it's hard to get published. So you do have to be okay with spending time, I think, in research. And I think I'm willing to put in some time, which is why case reports, review articles, and little focused research questions, that's going to be where I feel successful. But I had to learn that. I knew that I shouldn't be the PI on a huge project that spans multiple universities and multiple years, that's going to be something that I won't really be able to commit to. So be thinking about how much research you want to do. And for me, it always comes back to the clinical care. The clinic and the patient in the exam room is probably where my heart is the most, but I have interesting questions and I want to be able to try to find answers to them. So that's what motivates my research. When any opportunity presents itself to share your work, please go ahead and do it. Whether that's a student research forum, an institutional, research night, regional conferences, national conferences, take any opportunity you can to get your name out there, get your poster out there, and you will be surprised at who looks you up later, writes you an email about it, or even wants to get some media coverage about it. And so if you are looking for any media coverage, make sure you check with your university media liaison. This is personal advice, that if you think you've got some groundbreaking research, make sure you let somebody know. When I started talking about diabetes alert dog, I guess doing a series with 8 patients made me the world expert. And so I started getting interviewed on NPR, and then pretty soon my university media group was like, who are you talking to? And I think we need to make sure that you're saying the right things. So do make sure that if you want to be in the media, that you know what you're asking for. This is a little documentary that I got asked to be a part of, Luke and Jedi. It's available online. It's kind of a cute little diabetes documentary. Here's fellowship and teaching. So you obviously are going to be a student of endocrinology forever and student of diabetes forever. And but your role as a teacher will only grow. You will be teaching other trainees, you'll be teaching cross-discipline, you'll be potentially giving grand rounds and other special opportunities to teach as well. Through fellowship, that was true, and then as an attending, even more. So at all levels, you'll be teaching your future colleagues, your community providers. If you're running rounds, you're going to be a teacher on rounds. When you're doing a phone consult, you're going to be teaching as you go. And then advocacy. This is, things you have to know what builds you up, I guess. The things that turn your heart on, find your passions, and that's where I think advocacy work can be really valuable. So literally one of my job search criteria as I was looking post fellowship where I wanted to land was a place that would allow me to continue to be a camp physician at a diabetes basketball camp in Oregon. And so I had really the reason I'm in East Tennessee is they said, yeah, that sounds like a great opportunity. Sure, you can always have the last week of July off. And it's written into my contract that I can always be gone the last week of July to go to this diabetes basketball camp, and I don't have to count it as vacation time. Some of the other places I was looking couldn't make that guarantee, and that was the difference maker in where I was going to choose. So know what's really important to you. Being involved with other diabetes advocacy groups like JDRF, ADA, those are incredibly valuable, things I look forward to, I enjoy doing, and then when I look back on, I can feel proud of it. So I did that in fellowship. I've been part of the Diabetes and Youth Special Interest Group through ADA. I was their communications director. I was on the membership advisory group board for American Diabetes Association. Continue to be on medical staff at the basketball camp. I've taken multiple pies in faces to raise money for diabetes. And those are just the fun things that you get to do. You may not get paid for them, but they're the things that you really enjoy. So looking at the tangible steps that you can do over the next few years, I would take advantage of any supplemental experience that you can. Starting, potentially with what you're doing exactly right now. Focus on fellows. Not every fellow is doing this. There are lots of fellows out there who are not part of this program and who are missing out. And so anytime you have an opportunity to do something extra, go ahead and take it. The Endocrine Fellows Retreat, Pediatric Endocrine Society Visiting Fellowship, these are all things that may only last a few days or a week or a couple of weeks, but they stick with you and they stand out. And I think they do kind of punctuate our multiple years of training in the clinical world. And they really do, they build you up, but they also broaden it's not just practicing within your clinic or within your hospital. It really opens up sort of the entire world of endocrinology to you. Choose one or two areas to really focus and develop some expertise. I would still call myself a generalist in pediatric endocrine, in that I'm in a relatively small program. I need to be able to see everything, but you can still have expertise within that area. And so for me, it's still type 1 diabetes, it's diabetes technology, but it's also Turner syndrome. It's not saying I don't do the other things, but those are the things where I can take a special interest. Go to as many conferences as you can, present as often as you're invited to, ask to present, make professional contacts, and then to be able to get involved in advocacy. It was literally my very first focus on fellows, which is in San Francisco, I think. I met a guy who was he was really engaging. He was a fellow a couple years ahead of me. And ultimately he ended up being a faculty member at a university that's in my same state where I am now. And once I took my job here, I'd been on the job like 2 weeks. And he said, "Hey, would you come out to Vanderbilt and give grand rounds?" And I was like, "Why would you want to hear from me? I was a fellow 3 weeks ago." And he said, "Yeah, absolutely, come on out." So we arranged that. And it was that contact through Focus on Fellows that, plugged me into that opportunity. And then, through that got opportunities with ADA. And so the things that you do that are extra is what's going to set you apart and open up other opportunities as well. So sometimes those are advocacy, sometimes those are research, sometimes those are these extra supplemental experiences. Job search, I'll just go real quick. These are things for you to consider. What kind of work do you want to do? Do you have an academic mind? Do you want to be teaching? Do you want to be in a community practice, inpatient, outpatient? The jobs that you apply for should line up with the values about how you want to spend your time and how your brain works. If you don't like medical students, don't go into academics. You're going to be surrounded by med students forever. If you don't like seeing patients, don't be a clinician. If you don't like research, don't make your career dependent on getting that next big grant, because it might not come through and then you don't have a job. What size? And this is something, I thought I wanted to always be at kind of a bigger place, but I ended up taking a job at a smaller place because I found I could have a bigger impact, actually. Going a place that has a great need was very fulfilling to me. You have to know yourself. If you go to a place that has 18 other endocrinologists, you could kind of go or not go, and that place may not really notice. They could find somebody else. And so, yes, you're filling a need, you're always valuable, but I found that going to a place that was underserved, understaffed, it actually meant I could make a big difference every day. And whether I went or didn't go really mattered. And that actually felt really good to me. Think about how much call you take, think about how this affects your family. And literally, my commute in this semi-rural East Tennessee is short enough that I could walk home if I needed to. I could bike if the weather was better. And if I drive, it's 5 minutes. And so that's really different than if I was in a big city and I was commuting 45 minutes each way, because those 45 minutes in the morning and in the evening, that might be breakfast with my family and dinner with my family before bedtime. And so if I'm in the car somewhere, I miss out on those things. But know what your gifts and your skills are and go where you're most needed. That's where you're going to find fulfilling work. When you wake up every day and you say, what I'm doing really is going to make a difference today. So these are, again, practical advice. When you start your first real job, beware of clinical creep. There's always more to do in the clinic. You can always overbook another patient, and it always feels like the right thing to do. But you also realize that when you do that, you shut out the opportunity for advocacy, research, for extra teaching, or to get home on time so that you can eat dinner with your family. And the clinical creep is you saying yes, 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 always book another patient. And so learning to say no is the answer to clinical creep. There's huge learning your first year out of fellowship. Be ready for it, be open to it. It's still a great opportunity. The learning curve is still steep, but it's really fun. Stay connected to your national organizations, go to conferences, stay involved with Focus on Fellows, come back to ADA scientific sessions. The virtual meeting is, there's actually really nice things about it where you can kind of be in multiple rooms at the same time at ADA. And then if we're back in person at some point, then it's a great way to meet your colleagues across the country and around the world, see how diabetes is done differently in other places. And to make those personal connections are really, really valuable. Diabetes is both a huge world, but it's also pretty small. And so I have folks that I'll call when I've got clinical questions because I met them at ADA a couple of years ago. Always make progress on your career advancement. So know what your promotion and tenure requirements are so that you can be working towards those. I wish I had saved my evaluations from the grand rounds that I've given, because I just got an email from my division chief who said, hey, I need those because that's part of your promotion packet. I'm going, where do I get those? So hold on to every evaluation you ever get, student evaluations, grand rounds evaluations, because you have to submit those. Find senior faculty that can really mentor and guide you. My own personal favorite is be co-investigator and co-author on projects. It takes a lot of work to be a good PI. You can be a good co-I and not have to invest, lots of nights and weekends in getting a successful project. You can really benefit the project. Your name's on it. It counts for a lot of credit when you're going up for promotion. You can't be PI on every project. There's just not enough time. And then get help with grants if your career depends on them. And then a plug for ADA, definitely be a member. It's super cheap for early career folks. So everybody, if you're not already a member, make sure you become one. Make sure when you are no longer a fellow that you still qualify for that early career discount. And then even when you don't qualify for the discount, just do it. It is so valuable. It's worth every dollar. It's helpful to be in the special interest group forums. I've learned so much just monitoring the chatter that goes on, whether it's in like the COVID-19 group on the ADA or whatever. It's, I hear about sort of the pulse of the endocrine and diabetes community through those special interest group forums. There's opportunity for advocacy and involvement. If you say, I'm interested in serving on a committee, you're probably going to get tapped to serve on a committee. And there we go. And ADA is where professional connections start. It's super valuable. All right, lastly, how do you discern which opportunities to explore? Maybe it's supposed to be harder than this, but I really just have a couple slides on this. One is you only have limited time, and you can't say yes to everything, and you're gonna run out of time if you always say yes. So you have to know yourself. If you have big questions that you need to answer, like big research questions, you better be looking for a job where you can do some research. If you don't like medical students, don't do academics. Depends on how you feel about investing time in writing papers. Does it feel so good to have your name on a paper that you want to do it some more? Or are you never want to look at that paper again because you put in 3 years of your life and just barely got it published? So it depends on how you feel about that. Do you love diabetes camp? Does that need to be part of your life? Do you thrive as a teacher? Do you want to see patients every day for the rest of your career? These are all important questions to know about yourself as you're choosing a job. When do you say yes? How do you know? Is it going to advance your career? Will I enjoy it or be proud of it? And do I have the bandwidth? Those are really the three things. If you have to say no to any of these, like you need 3 yeses to say yes. If you say no to any of these, you shouldn't say yes. And in short, will this build you up as a person, as a physician? Saying no, this is the hard one. You'll have to practice it. feels really hard to say no, especially as a fellow. People ask you to do things. You can't just say, no, just not going to do it. But as an attending, you have to do this because people will keep asking you to do stuff, but you have to say no. You have to be okay missing some opportunities. That's actually okay. And so this is something I like. This was my line. It happened to be because my wife was pregnant with our third. And I was like, no, I can't take on anything else new. Like that would not be fair. That's not appropriate. And so this was like my line for 2 months. For the next 2 months, I'm saying no to anything new. And it was really hard to do, but it was so necessary. And every once in a while, when we get to a super busy season and I need to kind of dial it back, I bring this statement back. And folks respect it, actually. If something's going to bring you down, if it's going to just zap your bandwidth, if it's going to hurt your time with your family, if it's not going to advance your career, if you're emotionally just going to be drained, say no, and then feel good about it. So here's your life balance. There's always more to do at work. You have to stop on purpose. Make sure that when you walk in the door at the end of your day, you're bringing your best home. You want to bring your best home to your spouse, to your partner, to your family, your kids. You don't want to bring home a tired, frustrated, overburdened person and then release that on your family. That's not fair to them. So make sure that when you walk in, whether maybe you have to fake it a little bit, but if you're tired, like take your deep breath and then go in and make sure that you are there. If you're coming home tired every day and really burnt out, you're doing too much. You need to say no. Your partner is super critical in navigating these busy seasons. And you've probably asked them to do things in residency or fellowship where you've been busy. They're still important as a faculty attending as well, but you need to let them know when you're going to be busy, when that time is going to calm down again, so that they can partner with you. They are super important to your career success by making sure that you're successful at home as well. And then just a word about flexibility. I think there's huge perks actually to being in a small program. Again, you get to go where you're needed. You probably get to design what your job looks like. I came here when it was me and one other peds endocrinologist who was actually the fellow who trained a year ahead of me. And so we knew each other really well. We didn't have a boss, really. I mean, we had the Department of Pediatrics chair, but nobody knew what a pediatric endocrinologist was supposed to do. And so we got to make it up. And we wrote all the protocols. We decided when rounds were. We decided what the clinic was going to look like, the staff we needed, but we designed it. And so those are the potential perks of a small program. Is if I wanted to go to my the preschool theatrical production, I said, hey, Tuesday at 10:30, my schedule just needs to be clear so I can go do that. And it was like, okay, let's do it. The first day I showed up, I had a parking spot with my name on it. Like, where does that does not happen in fellowship. I showed up and I've got a corner office with windows. I'm like, I shared an office with 5 other people with no windows in fellowship. So, going to a small place has a lot of perks, and then being able to commute home in 5 minutes is huge. So that was probably my most surprising part of work-life balance that I really appreciate about a small program. I get to be a member of a Rotary group, be a good citizen, play some pickleball, and then it all comes back for my beautiful family that I love. When my daughter scraped her knee, this was a couple of years ago, but she scraped her knee and I'm putting a Band-Aid on it. She's kind of nervous. And I'm like, Megan, what's my job? And I'm expecting her to say, oh, doctor, okay, this is gonna be fine. And she goes, breakfast maker. And I'm like, that's right, I'm the breakfast maker. And that was like the best thing that I can hear, because one of my many jobs is I make the breakfast every day. And I probably wouldn't be able to do that if I was at a big place where I needed to leave an hour before rounds started and commute. It's been the biggest joy is to be at a small program. Here's my final thoughts. Be a member of ADA, plug in. You are already on the way to your early career. So recognize the paths that you're going down right now. Make sure that the ones that you're on are going to be building you up. Say yes to those. For the ones that aren't getting you anywhere, be able to say no and use your energy and your bandwidth elsewhere for something that's productive. And then I put my email on there if anybody has any follow-up questions. Glad to take those offline, or if the moderators can let me know if we've got any time left, I'm glad to take any right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Loos. I do want to ask all of the attendees if they have any questions, please do put them in the chat or put the raise hand up in the reactions. While we're waiting on questions, I just had one to get us started, which is you are so productive in so many different ways. You have your hand in a lot of different areas, but I think a lot of people find it very difficult, especially early in their career, to ask for any protected time at all, even something like a 70-30. Do you have any recommendations for, talking to your division chief or kind of making the argument that that little bit of protected time can really boost your career or do good for the division?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, I did have a model in that the other pediatric endocrinologist that I was joining was already 70-30. So it's kind of easy for me to say, I want to do what he's doing. So I guess I didn't have to like advocate too hard for that, but it is interesting. Like when you have split time, and essentially my clinical time kind of belongs to the hospital and the clinic, my academic time belongs to the university. Everybody wants you to do everything. And the clinical folks don't understand that on Wednesdays and also Friday afternoons, my 3 half days that I'm academic, that if there's clinical stuff, my door may be closed. I may not be responding to emails very quickly because I may be off doing something else. So I think practically, it's just letting people know when you are available and when you aren't available. Not that you have to don't be mean about it or anything. And if there's, clinical needs, they need to know, hey, I can just go down to your colleague down the hall. Sometimes it's a Post-it note on my door, like literally there's a Post-it note on my door right now that says do not disturb giving a Zoom talk from this time to this time. So that's how you can carve it out. But as far as setting up your actual contract and saying, hey, I need this time, absolutely. Even though we're at, this little East Tennessee State University, nothing against them, but they're not an academic powerhouse, but they would love to get their name out there. And so for me to say, hey, would you, I applied for a grant and got $10,000 support to do that biochemical fingerprint of hypoglycemia in human breath study. And I said, hey, would you support this? This is the first time that anybody in pediatric endocrine has ever done any research. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. I got the grant. And then I said, well, I want to be able to present it at ADA. So let's make sure that you would pay for my travel and my hotel and my, the fee to go to the conference. And they were like, yeah, for sure. And then all you have to do is say, hey, I work at ETSU, and they're happy. So it honestly, it doesn't take that much, I think, for folks to honor it, especially if you're at an academic university. If I was purely community-based, they may not love that I'm spending a bunch of time writing up case reports. But as long as you're involving med students, you're having med students and residents shadow you, you're talking with fellows, it becomes really clear about who's interested in teaching, who's interested in research. When the first year med students say, hey, we're doing a forum on pediatric subspecialists, and we'd like you to come and spend 30 minutes over your lunch to talk to us about what it's like being a pediatric subspecialist. Those are the things you absolutely say yes to. When I said yes to that, there were 2 first-year med students in that crowd who are now the 4th-year med students who wrote that case report that we just got published. So those are the kind of things, when you say yes to one thing, to the right things, it will put you in a position to make good collaborations that, not that it's all about you, that it comes back, but those are the things that are fun, is making those connections. Think about when you were early in your career, a step ago, 2 steps ago, and who it was that you looked up to and said, wow, they're involving me. They're very interested. Figure out who those people are. You can't mentor every medical student out there, but you can mentor one. Do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I don't see any comments in the chat and we are just past time. So I want to let everyone get
Okay.
to the workshops.
But and sorry, there's one really quick one. I think they said, how was your call? I always imagined it would be terrible if wasn't a large group to share it with. There was a lot of call, but it was low burden. So we had nurse triage line. And so we are now a group of 3. So we're on every 3rd week. But with our nurse triage line, we take about 1 phone call per night. And we usually are consulting on somewhere between 1 and 3 patients in the hospital. So it's a lot of call, but it's not hard.
I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Marshall Brown, as he presents on developing your job search strategy. Marshall Brown is a career and executive coach who's passionate about helping people to get clear, get focused, and get ahead in their lives. He's the founder of a global coaching company, Marshall Brown and Associates. And just a reminder, as he's speaking, if you could type your questions into the Q&A box or the chat, and then we can get those questions addressed at the end of his talk. So without further ado, thank you for joining us.
Happy Friday, and delighted to be back with the fellows again. I must have done a good job last year because they invited me back again after speaking with the group last year. So I hope everyone has had a productive day, whether it was your morning or your afternoon, and I'm real excited to be back with you, and nice to meet you, Brittany, who's our moderator. I'm going to ask you, Brittany, if you don't mind, just kind of monitoring the questions, and I'll try and keep on top of it as well. So as Brittany mentioned, I'm a career and executive coach. You don't need to know that much about me. This is not about me. This is about all of you. And I want to first of all congratulate you for all the hard work that you have been doing in your fellowship. And it's really, I learned last year from a lot of the fellows, it's really remarkable work that all of you are doing and intend to do in your future. So great work for everybody. Excuse me. And I want to mention, before I get started, a couple things here. One is today's presentation is going to be sort of at 50,000 feet. I'm not going to be able in an hour to like go into all the details of like specific resume topics and interviewing techniques. I'm going to talk about it in general terms. There are 3 other programs that are planned that are career development related, and I'm sure you'll be receiving, if you haven't already, information about that. One's going to be on interviewing, which will be more in depth than today. Another one that will be on negotiating your job offer. And then a really important one is on networking. So again, those will go into more in-depth conversations than will today. Today is really at 50,000 feet about how to do an effective job search and preparing yourself for one. The other thing I want to mention is I'm a big believer in, unless you put it out in the universe doesn't know what to give you. If you put out negative energy, that's probably what you're going to come back with. So as I was finishing up my presentation last night, having Panda Express Asian food, I got a fortune cookie, right? And my fortune cookie was, I don't know if you can see this or not, but it says, a satisfying career is a worthwhile pursuit. So no matter whether you are thinking about private practice or clinician or whatever, or academia, whatever you choose to do as you move forward, I would encourage you to make it a satisfying career and live your passion. And you'll hear me talk more about that later. But I wanted to share that with you. The universe said that's what I'm supposed to say today to all of you. So there are some words of advice. A satisfying career is a worthwhile pursuit. All right, so I guess I'm supposed to have, let me see. I need to share this. So let me see, share screen. And I'm gonna go here and share. And I'm assuming everybody can see that. Yes?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. So this is where we're going today. Here's our agenda. What I'm going to talk about are the new rules for job search and career success. Some of the things obviously have changed as we have entered and are living through this pandemic, and I'm going to talk a little briefly about that. Ways to stay motivated, because a job search can be demotivating. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to be or attempt to be more motivated. Secrets to an effective job search. What really I have seen and my clients have seen, I would consider to be job search killers. Some networking tips, some interviewing techniques. I'm going to talk a little bit about social media presence, and then we'll take some questions and some comments from folks. So that's where we're headed today. That's a little bit about me. We don't need to cover that. So there's a quick poll that I've asked the fellows to do. And I'm just curious, so I know maybe where to focus a little bit more of my attention today. I'm curious to know, where are you in your job search? So as the poll comes up, if you would just respond to this, I'm just starting to think about it. I really could use some direction. I've started, but not getting very far. I've started and I'm headed in the right direction, and I'm in the interviewing process. So let's kind of see where our audience is today. Okay, so just starting to think about it. Seems to be the main one, and then the other ones are fairly just, okay, that gives me a good sense. Thank you. So we'll end the poll. Results, stop sharing, okay. And we'll move on here then. Gil, can we move on?
Yeah, just close it on your end. It's out.
I did close it on my end. Okay. All right. So perhaps some of you have heard this term already, that we are living, even more so than before when this term was first defined right after 9/11, we are living in a VUCA world today. And VUCA stands for volatile, meaning that we are living in a very rapid and unpredictable world today, no matter where you are, by the way, in the world. It's very uncertain. It's unclear. We're not sure really where we might be even in a week or 2 weeks from now. The C is for complex. It's a very chaotic. We're living in a very chaotic, confused world. And we're learning to connect in ways that we have not really connected with in the past. And we're all trying to still figure this out. And then the A is ambiguous. There's a lack of clarity. There's a lack of advancement about where we're going in the future. And this is all causing people to be very anxious. And I'm not trying to paint a very dark picture, but I'm merely telling you about this world that we are living in so that you are prepared for this, and that you acknowledge that this has become normal, this VUCA world, that is making people very anxious, that in some ways it's lowering one's motivation, that it's a threat, and it's a lack of clarity about where our careers are going. And you know what? It's taking a lot of energy from us. We don't know what's happening. I mean, look at the atrocities that are happening within the last 10 days in Afghanistan. It's also paralyzing. And I see this with a lot of leaders that I work with and folks in career transition. It's causing people to really paralyze their decision making. So I believe that it's important to be in the space that you acknowledge the kind of world that we are living in right now. And in the good and the good side of that, or the positive part of that, is we've all become more adaptable. We've all become more flexible in many ways. We have hopefully been learning about this new humanity that we might not have experienced before, where we are learning to embrace everyone's uniqueness and diversity that we might not have unfortunately dealt with in the past. We are increasing our digital literacy. So we are becoming more well-versed in various forms of communication. I mean, I've been doing presentations on various topics for over 20 years right now. Never would I have thought that I would be doing this much on Zoom. And I'm sure as a participant, you never thought you would be using Zoom as much as you already have. But we've all had to learn to adapt to these various communication platforms. And never before have I seen project management skills be more important. So I'm going to talk about this later, but I would encourage you to think about your job search as a project. And just as you would manage any other project, having your timelines, your deadlines, you chunking it down, use your same project management skills when it comes to your job search, no matter where you are in the process. I know some of you have started thinking about it. That's great. Some of you might be further along. We know that from the poll. No matter where you are, think about it as project management. And the other thing that's been kind of positive about this whole VUCA world that we're living in is that business travel, and I'm sure you've experienced this. I mean, I know, although I never was able to participate in it three years ago, this is my second year, so 3 years ago when the fellows got together, we unfortunately have not been able to do that, but business travel has been enhanced by, or replaced, I should say, replaced by enhanced technology. So I think this VUCA world has also, although it's been stressful and anxious, has also allowed us to re-examine our priorities and what we are passionate about. And I would suggest that that's a place for you, if you haven't started to uncover what it is that you're really passionate about and what it is that you want to be doing next, that you start uncovering that, because that's the message you want to put out into the universe. If you're putting out into the universe that you're not clear, you don't necessarily know what it is that you want to be doing, that's what's going to come back to you. Now, I am not saying as a fellow you need to make all of those decisions today, but it's something for you to be thinking about. And to also recognize what your transferable skills are. People aren't necessarily moving up the corporate ladder or whatever industry you are in based on a hierarchy. They are moving through via their transferable skills. So you want to make sure that as you progress as a fellow and further along in your career, that you are marketing yourself and you know what your transferable skills are. And if you're not sure what your transferable skills are, now's a good opportunity to start doing that assessment, or those assessments, I should say, and to uncover what your skills are. So that hopefully is a brighter side of this VUCA world that we are all living in. And I want to talk just briefly about some new rules for career success. So one is you have got to take charge of your own career today. And I was saying this years ago, and it's even more relevant today. You cannot wait around for someone to say to you, oh, you should apply for this fellowship or for this residency or for this academic position. You have got to be out there and taking charge of your own career. And I'm going to give you some techniques in a little while about how to do that. But taking charge of your career is even more important in our as we move through this pandemic. Developing your personal brand. You have got to figure out what differentiates you from your competition. And we will talk again a little bit more about that in a little while, but knowing what your personal brand is, what it is that you have to offer that is different from anyone else. And you can sit back and say, oh, well, I don't really, have anything that differentiates myself. I'm sorry, everybody does. Your story is very different from any other fellow that's attending here today. Figure out what your story is, figure out what differentiates you, know what your personal brand is, and show up in a way that's going to exude your personal brand. I mentioned this earlier, and I'm going to say it several times today. You have to have a plan. It can't be just a haphazard way of looking for a job. You've got to have a plan. I also encourage you to have a mentor or a sponsor, and maybe it's a couple mentors and a couple sponsors as you progress through your fellowship and as you move into your career, to have a mentor or a sponsor, somebody who's like your professional partner someone who you can bounce ideas off of, someone who perhaps is more seasoned than you are, that you can get some ideas from about what your next step should be. And I would also encourage you to take on a leadership role. Yes, it would be great to take it on as a fellow in this program. And if that opportunity doesn't become available, take it on in another organization, another association. Maybe it's in your personal life, you take on some type of leadership role. But that's going to be really important for you as you progress. And the skills that you learn are very important skills to have as you move through your professional development. Okay, so secrets to an effective job search real quickly. Understand what you have to offer to your audience. And this goes back to what are your skills? What am I passionate about? What's my purpose? What's my vision? So understand what it is that you have to offer. Using a well thought out approach to reach your audience in as many ways as possible. We're going to be talking about networking a little bit. Again, having a plan, very logical, a very systematic way to succeed, and using your time wisely. So I've had some of my folks will say to me, well, Marshall, I've sent out 15 resumes last week or Vitas, and I didn't get one hit from any of those. So my question always is, well, what did you do to connect with people? Well, I didn't have the time to do that, is what I hear back. Well, I got to tell you, I would much rather have you spend the time networking and using your time wisely to connect with people, like-minded people, people that are doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing, than writing 15 resumes and cover letters. Studies are showing that there's only about 20 to 25% of jobs today that are getting posted. What does that tell you, folks? People are finding jobs through their network. So I would encourage you, if you only have X amount of time to do your job search because you are involved with everything else that you're doing and trying to have a personal life, right? Spend the majority of that time networking, getting out there and meeting like-minded people, getting out there and getting involved in organizations so that you will meet like-minded people. It's about marketing your value or branding your value, as I said earlier, but this is how people are making effective job changes, no matter what industry they are in. I want to provide you with, since I talked about how people are demotivated, I want to also talk to you about how people are staying motivated today. Having a structure is very important. As I mentioned earlier, it's like a project, right? Your project management skills teach you that it needs to have structure. Same thing here. Having a structure in place that you spend X amount of time on your job search and then you walk away from it, right? And especially now, that can be a real challenge because not only are you involved in other things, but we're all working virtually for the most part. It can be very difficult and be very isolated, but set aside time and have that structure. I have X amount of time that I'm going to send resumes out. I have X amount of time that I'm going to network, and having that structure. Don't let your hobbies and volunteers and your volunteer commitments and everything else that one has to do, right? To take over your schedule. It's very easy to get distracted. Unfortunately, we're really not taught, maybe some of us have some skills, but really not taught how to do an effective job search in high school and college and as we progress. And typically, it's only natural that if it's something that we don't necessarily know about or we're uncomfortable doing, we kind of put it aside, right? And we let other things take its place. And sometimes it's easier to do things that we enjoy doing and to get involved, doing things around the house, right? set aside time. This is why the structure is very important. I mentioned earlier, having the structure. So, okay, I am not going to do the laundry. I'm not going to take the dog for a walk right now. I'm going to do that later. I'm going to walk the dog later because right now I need to have the time to focus on my job search. Having the daily goals and objectives fits right into that. And if need be, you chunk it down, between, okay, this hour and that hour, this is what I'm going to work on. Some of my clients have a timer that they set that as they're making phone calls, they decide, okay, I'm going to take an hour to make phone calls, and they set their timer. And after that hour, they go on and do something else. Whatever works for you. I would also suggest that you organize your time based on your time clock, right? Like some people, I tend to be, I'm up at 5:30 in the morning, I'm exercising, I'm walking the dog. Well, by 3, 4 o'clock, you can forget it. My energy is really low. So I tend to do things that I know are going to be more of a time commitment, maybe things that are going to be a little bit more difficult for me. I tend to do those things when I have that energy, right? And then sort of the administrative things happen when, I don't have the same energy. So if you know that you're going to, that making some phone calls, meeting some people on Zoom is going to be a real challenge for you, then I would encourage you to do that during a time when you have a lot of energy. And it could be reverse for you. Maybe you're more of an afternoon, evening person. That's fine. But know your energy clock and know when your mood swings might be. Again, I mentioned taking on a leadership role, taking on a volunteer role is really important. And it makes us feel good, typically. That's why, you want to, if you're going to do some volunteering, pick something that, you are passionate about, that you would enjoy doing. It's a nice distractor. And obviously it gives back. It looks good on your resume. So I would encourage you to do some volunteering. And you know what? Celebrate every success, as small as you might think it is, but keep yourself motivated and celebrate those successes. If you acknowledge, making that phone call and connecting with somebody about networking is really tough for me, you know what? You do it, and then you go do something fun for yourself, or you give yourself some kind of reward or that extra bowl of ice cream, whatever it might be, but celebrate those successes. Give yourself a reward for accomplishing, whether it be a daily task or a weekly goal that you might have. This is a way to keep yourself motivated, and keep your job search going. I see some folks that are real energized about it, and then 2 months into it, they haven't gotten a lot of hits from their resume, and they've tried to connect with people, and oh well, I really wish I could help you, but I don't know of any jobs. That kind of response. So again, they lose their motivation and they stop with their job search. I would encourage you to keep it going despite all the odds that might come back for you, because it's going to be even more challenging for you to start it up again, because that voice in your head is going to say, oh, you know what? I started this and it didn't work, so why should I do this? No, you want to keep it going, no matter how small the task is. And another challenge that I see with folks is, especially when they get a job offer, or they're in negotiations, I should say, when they're in negotiations for a job offer, they tend to say, okay, so this is really going to happen, and I'm really close to this, so I don't have to bother with my network anymore, and I don't have to follow up on any of these other interviews I would have. Big mistake, folks. Big mistake. I would suggest that until you have that contract or employment offer letter in hand, that you keep your job search going. It should be an ongoing process. So if we had some more time, I would ask the folks, unless you want to put it in the chat, we could always do it that way. What keeps you motivated during your job search? Maybe send out some tips Feel free to do that, by the way. I should have said in the beginning, feel free to like, this is not about me, this is about all of you. So if you all have some techniques that are good, whether it be around staying motivated or developing your network as I go through this, feel free to share those tips with your colleagues. Okay, so the process, I pretty much hit upon this. I just want to mention a couple other things. Again, it needs to be very structured, very methodical to identify opportunities and get your name and expertise in front of the right people. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little while, but the process is part of knowing who your target audience is. Process is all about knowing your timeline. For some of you, we've identified you haven't started yet. Some of you already have. So knowing whether it's going to be a short-term job search, whether you're close to negotiations, where you are, but knowing what your timeline is, defining your objective. What is it that I want to do? What is it that what are my skills at? What are my transferable skills? What type of industry, what type of hospital setting, what type of academia perhaps you want to be working in. Again, whether it be as a clinician, a private practice, whether it be something that's full-time or part-time. I see more and more people that are doing 2 or 3 part-time positions these days because so much of it obviously can be done remotely. So identifying whether it's something full-time, part-time, maybe it's on a contract position. I would encourage you to start visioning the clearest picture that you possibly can of what your next opportunity looks like. Perhaps some of you have done vision boards in the past. If you haven't, I strongly encourage you to do a vision board. It's all about, again, putting the energy into what it is that you want to be doing. And you might not have all the answers yet. That's okay. That's okay. But start visioning what it is. I used to have people plan their vision board 5 years out. And then, March of 2020, we cut it back to 3 years. Now I'm telling people, you know what? You plan a year out and you're lucky, right? So start thinking about, what does August of 2022 look like? If I was in my ideal position, what would that look like? And you go through magazines and you look online for pictures and words that are meaningful to you, some things that resonate for you, and you put it on a foam board, right? And you have that by your desk. Some people that I've worked with on this have used. I always screw up the name. It's CorkU, I believe. You can do it as a cork board online. It's an app. I have done vision boards for years, and when we were able to travel, I took a picture of mine, and it was my screen on my laptop, so that even though I was like something resonated for me, it's like, is this where I really want to go? I would look at that vision board, and I would think, is this something that's meaningful to me? And maybe something would come along, and it wasn't. So I would say, you know what, that wasn't on my vision board, and I'm not sure that's the avenue I want to pursue. So having a clear vision is helpful. And again, it's your vision board. So if you decide in 6 months, you know what, this is not what the vision board that I want, you change it. It's your vision board, but having some vision. Some people don't like vision boards, so they write a story. Okay, if that works better for you, do it, right? Write a story as if it's now August 2022, and you've been in your ideal position. What does that look like? What am I doing? Write it as a story. Just do something. The process is also around, brainstorming, identifying lots of possibilities. Again, this is where your network can help you. Oftentimes we think, especially in this stage of your careers, we think, okay, it has to be either this or this. Look at all the possibilities. Brainstorm with your colleagues, brainstorm with your fellows that are on that are going through this process with you about what you could be doing based on your skills, and do your research about what those possibilities might be. Let's see, in terms of some job search killers, what I wanted to share with you is, and you haven't gotten this yet from me, then you're not with me, but you got to have the structure. And if you don't have the structure, it's not going to work. You've got to have some support through this. It's not something that you can do entirely on your own. And you're very fortunate that you're in a colleague with your other fellows. So rely on the fellows that are in this program with you to brainstorm those ideas and to help you identify what it is that you might have to offer and who is in their network. So a job search killer is definitely one that you try to do on your own. No, bring in other people, whether it be family, friends, significant others, this cohort. But a real job search killer is one that you try to do it on your own. I have never seen anyone do it entirely on their own. So build a support system around you and one that you can be accountable to, right? Yes, we have to be accountable to ourselves first, no question about it. But it's also helpful when we have someone else to be accountable to. You know, especially with those things I talked about earlier, you know, like I've got to make those 2 calls tomorrow. Okay, so you go to an accountability partner and say, you know, I'm really scared to make these 2 calls, but I'm going to do it. And I'd like to call you, or I'd like to, you know, send you a text after I do those 2 calls, to have that accountability to someone else other than yourself, and then reward yourself. So folks that I see are not doing successful job search are ones that are not accountable to someone else. And I know this is a difficult concept for people to grasp. I mentioned it earlier about branding yourself. Branding is all about marketing yourself. And I would suggest that you start thinking about yourself as a brand and use the concept of marketing yourself. It will help you as you move through your career, not just when you're doing, you know, your first or second job search, but think about your brand, what it is that is going to separate you from your competition. And every document that you send out, any personal message, any professional message that goes out, anything you put on LinkedIn, any paper that you write should reflect your brand. And if you're sending out one message, but you're speaking another message of what your skills are, that's a job search killer. So that's why it's important, like I said earlier, to know what your skills are, to know what your brand is, so that you are able to market yourself successfully. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here for a second. And Brittany, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do we have any questions that you might want me to address? Otherwise, I'll move forward.
Yeah, are there any questions from anyone in the audience? If not, I had a question.
Okay, all right, I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. You talk a lot about networking, and I'm assuming you might be going into that a little bit more later, but just networking in this current environment, how do you go about it? You know, a lot of times, like, we were networking at in-person conferences, was a really great opportunity to network, and now those don't exist. So what's a good approach to networking in the current environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. Every industry that I work in, and I find this for myself even, you know, I'm an entrepreneur, right? And I've got to be out there networking too. It's a real challenge, no question about it. So to answer your question, do as much social media, have a strong social media presence as you can. Look for opportunities where you can be on calls like this. Obviously, with the Fellows Program, you know, you all are networking with each other. Look for opportunities like this. Look for opportunities for other professional and personal development opportunities where you're going to network with people. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So you jumped ahead of me a little bit, but I want to be sure I cover it. You know, you never know who is in someone else's, we used to call Rolodexes, right? You never know who has a contact in maybe a clinic or in a hospital or primary care affiliation, I'll say, lack of a better word right now. You never know who's in someone else's network. So sometimes people say to me, well, Marshall, I don't know anyone that works in that industry. Well, who else do you know that might know someone? And those are the folks you want to tap. And not only for you to get to know them, but for them to get to know you. So that's kind of a long story back to, have your strong social media presence. I was telling people to do this early on with LinkedIn. It is even more critical now to make sure you have a strong LinkedIn presence. And what I mean by that is not just like going in and connecting with lots of people and then not ever connecting with them again, or sharing your experiences or finding out what they're struggling with that maybe you can help with them. It's not just about, the count on the LinkedIn of, 1,000 people. It's about developing relationships with those people. That was important before, and it's even more important now because you're absolutely right. We don't have that as much face-to-face. Now, some industries are starting to open up a little bit more. I'm in Southern California, and a lot of places were just actually closed down the last couple of days. I was talking to some people on the East Coast, and things are starting to open up a little bit. There was a big event the other night that, I typically would have been to, but I wasn't going to fly cross country. So things are starting to open up. Be on the lookout for that. And as long as you feel healthy and as long as you feel safe going to those events, then I would encourage you to do that. And another great way to do that in these times is, like I said earlier, about getting involved. Getting involved on a committee. You never know who you're going to meet on that committee. You want to be with like-minded people. So I kind of hope indirectly that answered your question.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so active and passive job searches. Briefly about this is an active job search is about, well, let's key factors to job success, okay, is having the right attitude. An active job search person you feel very much in control, you feel very confident, you're willing to take up the challenge, and you're open to receiving feedback and suggestions from other people. Versus a passive one is, oh, I am never going to find a job. It's a challenging time, and you take on that victim mode. You tend to blame others. You're inflexible. You're unwilling to try something. You're not following a structured project management process like I suggested. And you're nervous and you're worried. That's a very passive attitude to take. I would encourage you to take the more active job approach. When it comes to another key factor is it's all about staying focused. You seek out external contact and you continue to develop your network, which is very active. You're involved, you're engaged, like we talked about. Your focus is on the job search. You're interested in people, you're interested to find out what they are doing and how you can help them. That's an active focus. Whereas a passive focus is more around being very isolated. Your energy is like all over the place. And I know it's hard to do that these days. Trust me, I know, okay? But keeping your energy very focused is more active, where scattered is a very passive. You're willing to take on any job. That's not exactly the focus I would encourage you to take. Let's see, there's some other focus areas, but I'm going to skip over because of the time here. Let's talk about resilience though. So when it comes to resilience, there's no question about it. It's tough out there, right? I mentioned all that earlier. It's important in an active job search to depersonalize the rejection. And what I mean by that is there's no question you will get rejected. In fact, I even hate that term, to be honest with you, at times, but it's commonly used. you want to have, again, this is where a support group will help, or your cohort of other fellows will help. But it's going to be a challenge out there, and you might face some folks that say, oh, we were down to 2 when we selected the other candidate. Okay, you know what? It's going to happen. You can't personalize that as much as that's where you want to go. That's where our minds typically will go is, oh, they rejected me. I'm never going to find a job. No, you don't want to do that. You can't take it personally. It just wasn't the right fit for them. And, it'd be great for you to be in the position of saying, this is not the right fit for me. So you can't, you've got to be resilient is what I'm trying to say. So that's what I want to cover about passive active job search. Okay, so let's get to networking, because this is something that I'm very passionate about, and that's when was one of the reasons that we planned a whole session on just networking. And I don't have the dates of that yet, but I think that's still being planned when that is. But I would encourage you, and if you walk away with nothing else today, okay, I know I'm like sharing a lot of information with, and I don't see the chat, but hopefully your colleagues are as well sharing information. The importance of networking. It is critical that you develop a network. And I don't mean just one when you're in job search. If you don't have a network now, I would suggest that you start developing a network now, and that you make it part of your own professional development, whether you are in job transition, whether you are looking for a new opportunity, wherever you are, I would encourage you to have a strong network. People that are doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing, like-minded people. It's not just about who you know, but it's about who knows you. That's why I mentioned earlier, it's not just about getting 500 people to join you on LinkedIn. It's getting to know those people, finding out what their pain points are. Maybe you can help them, or maybe in your network, you can suggest someone that they talk to. It's about building those relationships. And like I said earlier, if you haven't done it yet, start it. If you walk away with nothing else, start it. And again, you're in an ideal situation because you have folks that are looking to do similar things in terms of developing their network too. And it's got to come from a place of authenticity. You've got to be yourself. People are able to read through if you're or see through, if you're not being authentic, and you've got to come at it from a place of, this is who I am, and I'm looking to get information from you. I'm not necessarily coming to you for a job right now, because I don't have that clarity yet, but I want to get some information from you. So be authentic, know what you have to offer. If you're not clear on that yet, it's okay. You'll get more clarity as you speak to people, but doing it in isolation is not going to help you. So know what you have to offer. Develop a 30-second elevator pitch, and again, emphasizing what it is that you have to offer, and talk about your skills, talk about your competencies, and what your skills are. And when you are developing your network, try to avoid those closed-ended questions. In particular, one around, well, a closed-ended question, is like a yes/no question, right? You want to be able to ask open-ended questions to get more clarity, to get more information. It's not just about saying to someone, do you know someone who might be good for me to talk to? No, that's a closed-ended question. The response is going to be yes or no. You ask it as an open-ended question. Who sorry, my English is off. Who do you know who might be good for me to talk to, right? Not, do you know someone? No. So ask the open-ended questions and avoid the closed-ended question. Use your active listening skills. Don't be, so caught up in, what question should I ask now? No, you have your questions written down in advance, right? And you use your active listening skills. That's why we have 2 ears. So use your active listening skills to hear what they have to say. You never know what they're going to say, kind of read between the lines. So use your active listening skills. And when we do start, and we will eventually start meeting again, and if you're not comfortable going to a meeting or conference on your own, then invite someone to go with you. And you do this tag team kind of thing where you're in an event and you say, okay, so we're together here, and the two of us, and let's go meet 2 more people, and in a half hour we're going to come back and report into each other, right? So again, you have that accountability partner. You have someone else that is in a similar situation that you might be in. And if you're not comfortable going to large events, then I would suggest you don't do it, but you start off in a smaller event, right? Maybe it's, again, getting on a committee where when you do go to a larger event, you already know people, especially if you tend to be more of a Myers-Briggs type introvert, right? For the extroverts, they are out there and they love to go to all the events, and they're meeting more people and they're moving from one group to another, and they're like moving and grooving, right? That's challenging for an introvert. And by the way, neither way is right or wrong. Let's make that clear. Neither way is right or wrong. But what I'm saying is, if you tend to be more of an introvert, then don't go to a large event for your first meeting. Go to a smaller event and get involved. And that way, when you do go to a large event, you already know people. Don't come across as pushy. People can read through that. If you say, I'm not coming to you for a job, and then you ask them for a job, no, not a good idea. So don't be pushy. And again, show up authentically. Talk to as many people as you possibly can. Join organizations. Build those relationships with people, and determine how you can help them solve their challenges too. So that's some quick networking tips. I want to give you some quick tips on social media presence. And what I mean by this is LinkedIn and other forms of connecting with people via social media. Create a professional profile that has a professional picture of you on it, right? That has the pertinent details, that talks about your competencies, talks about what you are passionate about. Oftentimes I see people take the information from their resume or their Vita and they just move it right over to LinkedIn. No, again, this goes back to marketing. LinkedIn and these other social media platforms are another way for you to market yourself in a different way. On LinkedIn and everything, and these other places, you can have, what your presentations are, your research that you've done. You can talk about it in terms of what your successes are, more so than you can on your resume. I've had some people that will create their profile on LinkedIn that it talks about their situations that they were in, the actions that they took, and then what the results are. Because face it, people want to see results today. And this gets into not only developing your LinkedIn profile, but also when it comes to interviewing, you want to be able to talk about what your results are. That's going to differentiate you. So you want to be sure that you are able to do that. So people typically will hire based on past performance. Past performance is an indicator for future performance. So you want to be able to articulate the situation that you were in, the action that you took, and what the results are. So creating a profile with a professional picture, being succinct in your accomplishments. Don't forget about including your efforts as a volunteer. It's to have a well-rounded profile. Make your meaningful connections. Tell your story on your LinkedIn profile. Tell your audience why this is a profession that you are pursuing and you're passionate about it. Don't forget, many skills can be taught. No one can teach you about how to be passionate about what it is that you're doing. So people often hire, especially with early career candidates, they look for what you're passionate about. Excuse me. what you're passionate about. So be able to tell your story, post regularly. This is not about just a one-time hit. Post regularly, whether it be, some of my folks will set up blogs, they'll set up other means of communicating with people to share their knowledge. You never know who's going to be sharing that information with someone else and what might be meaningful for them. Ask colleagues for recommendations, and always know what are the trends in your profession and available positions. This is also important when it comes to all these social media sites folks are on, is to follow influencers. So following people that are doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing, following influencers in your field, and join the LinkedIn groups that they are in. Those are the influences that, again, this is where I mentioned early on about having a mentor, a sponsor. This is where those people can help you because they are already involved in your profession. So look to them to guide you through what group should you be in. Okay, so within the few minutes left we have, I'm going to talk about interviewing. And again, we have a separate session on this later on. I think it's either November, December, I can't remember right now. But obviously you prepare yourself, you practice. I don't have folks that I work with memorize their stories. It can't come from here. It's got to come from your gut. That's where you're going to show up authentically. Don't necessarily memorize. Now you might have some bullets for yourself of what you want to talk about, but don't memorize. People can read through that, especially, hiring managers can read through that, right? This is where I'm saying about being authentic. So prepare yourself, practice, accept the fact, you know what, everybody gets nervous and it's okay. So maybe you have to meditate beforehand or practice some self-compassion or some mindfulness before you go into an interview, whatever you need to do. But it's okay to be nervous. It's understood. Know what your value is when you are going into the interview. I also encourage folks to come at it from a place of, you know what, I'm interviewing them too. This is not just about them finding the right candidate, but it's about me finding the right opportunity. And it balances it out, right, mentally for ourselves. And I'm finding that more and more people, because they do want to be in a career that they are passionate about, if they are really looking at the right fit for them. And it's not just about what the right fit is for the employer. So in a good interview, you answer the questions and you don't make any mistakes and they like you. Okay, that's sort of a good interview. Whereas in a great interview, you engage them in a professional and intelligent conversation about your ability to excel in the position that they are looking for and that they want you. That's the difference between good and great. A great one is when you engage them in professional and intelligent conversation about your ability, your competencies to excel in the position. You also, again, I mentioned about situation, action, results. This is behavioral interviewing. You want to be able to talk about your successes and not just say, oh, yeah, I can do that. No, you want to be able to talk about not only that you have done it in the past, but what the success of you doing that, what differentiated you from your competition. And keep in mind that it's not up to the interviewer necessarily to determine if you are the best candidate. It's your responsibility to prove it to them. And that's where knowing your skills, knowing what you're passionate about, knowing your values, that's what's going to help you to be even more successful in your interview. But when it does come to interview, make sure that you have your situation, action, results, that you know your stories. Some people call it challenge, action, result. Some people call it STAR. There's all kinds of acronyms for it, but whatever works for you. So again, I'm not going to go into much detail about the interviewing because you're going to have a whole other session on interviewing. But keep in mind when it does come to interviewing, situation, action, results, be prepared to talk about yourself, to be able to tell them about why you're in the profession that you're in. Maybe be prepared to talk about the best job and the best boss and the worst boss you've ever had. They obviously want to know about your educational background. Oftentimes, I'm be very upfront with you, and some of my best personal and professional friends are hiring managers and HR people. They don't always take the time beforehand to read your resume. So don't assume that they've read your resume. You have to be able to articulate your resume and your story. So be prepared for behavioral questions. Wow, we're at let's see, on the East Coast, we're at 4:40. So not bad, Brittany, huh? I think we did it, right? So if there are questions,
All right.
I'll be happy to attempt to address them. And again, I want to thank you for participating today. And I wish you, before we wrap up, I just wanted to be sure I mentioned that I wish you much luck in your success. Some of my colleagues will be doing the other presentations. I'm not sure, Brittany, I think a slide was prepared. I'm not sure, but I guess you'll share that at the end. So I'll leave that part up to you, but questions or comments people might have.
Yeah, so there is a question in the chat. The question is, how early before you start looking for a job should you start networking with the aim of looking for a job? And how early should you have conversations with potential employers before looking for a job?
Yesterday and yesterday. Yeah, absolutely. This, if you, I'm going to assume here, maybe you're a year out from finding a job, okay, or looking for a job. This is the time to be developing your network. This is the time to meet like-minded people. This is the time to get involved and start developing your profile. And I don't mean just profile on LinkedIn, but your portfolio. That's the word I'm thinking, portfolio. Now is the time to develop your portfolio so that in 6 months from now, when you do start looking for what your next success is going to be, you've already done a lot of that legwork. Oftentimes I see people waiting until the very last minute to start developing their network. And as Brittany alluded to earlier, it's more challenging now to develop that network. So it is going to take longer to develop that network. So I would suggest you do it right now, since yesterday is already passed, that you take the opportunity with this group today to start developing your network. And I know that in the fellows program, you'll be able to do that, which is great. Keep in mind, this is not the only group that you can be networking in. Find out where other people that are doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing are networking, and reach out to those groups as well. And then did I answer both questions?
Yeah, yeah. So basically the second part was how early should you be talking to potential employers? Like, hey, I'd be interested in working here, or, those kind of conversations.
Yeah. Do it now.
Yeah. I had one last kind of sort of specific question, but I know in academics anyways, a lot of jobs are posted, kind of what you were alluding to, that a lot of jobs are posted where there's already a candidate in mind. Should you be trying to pick those out as a potential applicant and avoid them, or should you just kind of know that that's going to happen to you? I don't know. When you're looking for jobs, is there any way to avoid that, or should you just know it's part of the process?
Yeah, it's all part of the process. I can't say, for sure whether somebody's going to, seek out another opportunity, seek out another person, even though they might have somebody in mind or not. But again, this goes back to your network. I mean, somebody's going to be offered that job, right? And somebody is their number one candidate, perhaps because it was through a referral. You want to get on as many referral lists of people that are in those positions, that know people that are in hiring positions, as you possibly can. So I wouldn't focus too much on, oh, well, should I apply for this because I know so-and-so is already getting it? Okay, then maybe that's not where you spend your energy. And maybe you spend that time more on, okay, so who else could I be adding to my network that would help me to become the number one candidate? Or at least to get my resume and my information to the top of the stack versus, somewhere in the middle or towards the bottom. Did I answer your question?
Sorry.
Sometimes I get like, so caught up.
Yeah, no, you answered my question. That was really helpful. All right, well, I think that, let me see, that's it, and we are out of time. So we really appreciate it, and that was very helpful for our fellows. So thank you so much. All right, so I think we are about ready to wrap up. So thank you so much for the great discussion and questions. And this
Brittany, special shout out to you for moderating too.
Oh, thank you. It's been fun. I don't get to do much moderating in my job, so it's been good.
Good for you.
So we appreciate everyone's attendance and attention and questions and being engaged. And this does conclude our sessions for the day. We'd like to thank all of our presenters on today's sessions and workshops for the great content. We'd also like to thank the Leona M. and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust for their support on today's program. And also wanted to thank, again, each of you for joining us for the 8th annual Focus on Fellows. We'll be hosting additional sessions in the fall. So that's going to be in November, Working Smart in a Virtual Environment. So that hopefully will address some of these topics that came up today regarding our current state, with everything going on. In January 2022, we'll be discussing interview techniques. March 2022, negotiating your job offer. May 2022, networking. And then to top it all off, we'll have our scientific sessions in June, hopefully in New Orleans, as long as everything starts going our way. So we thank you again for your time, and we look forward to connecting with you at the next Focus on Fellows program. Thanks, everyone.